This is the year where every transit, when we talk about transits, the significant transits, we have transits every day. The moon's transiting a sign, right? It's leaving Taurus into Gemini today. Those can be significant in sometimes, especially lunar cycles, but when we're talking about outer planets and the transits of those, and when they come into contact with each other, the main thing we're going to talk about today is generational astrology and how that is going to be impacted by this. And go through these three outer planets and why they're so unique, but why are they even more unique when they come together, and they've never come together like this in history that we can even look at. We can't even look at, oh yeah, the last time that all three outer planets were in harmony at the exact degree. Good luck finding it. I've looked for 24,000 years in ephemerises and I can't find it. So this is the biggest of the resets that are happening in the astrology. And so we had the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that everybody talked about. I did, everybody, and that was the end of the conjunctional astrology. Since 2020, we've had all these huge planets come into conjunction, being in the same place in the sky since 2020, and it just ended in February. And we get a huge rest of our life break. We'll never see that again. But when we actually start to think about now, we get all these really good alignments, and the way that the world's going, you would think it would just start being that way. So I'm going to use a basic example in astrology as an astrologer, especially when you're a young astrologer and you're doing readings for people. The first thing you do is you look at Jupiter, when's Jupiter coming in their next house? And then you learn as an astrologer, you can't rely everything on Jupiter coming into a house to change somebody's problems or make their life better. So when you think about planets getting ready to come together, it's the same thing. You have to remember that there's more going on. So when you think about somebody in their life, and let's say it's Jupiter in their first house and it's going into their second and they're having a money problem. When I was a young astrologer, we're talking 20 years ago, I'd be like, well, Jupiter's about to come into your second, so you'll be making good money. Even though maybe they'll come back and be like, well, I didn't really make a lot of money. I did, score a car that I didn't have that was a gift, right? And so whatever we sometimes put out there in our projection in astrology of what's going to happen, and well, this is great alignment. I think Rick Levine says it best, whenever we're in trines and when we're in sextiles, that just means the energy is so free flowing, but that could be any kind of energy. And I love how he describes it like a hockey puck on ice, just hit as hard, how hard do you really want to hit it and how far does it want to go? But to me, I'm we haven't had any really cool, positive transits in a long time. We're talking, this last decade really didn't have them. So we are coming into that energy of this new, okay, we've been through some really rough stuff, but it's bigger than that. Everything is resetting to a completely new cycle. And so I really want to talk about how you are in this, what we call the reality, and how it is fully going to go through its shift. Now, I said it on the panel yesterday at the astrology panel, but as humans, we have this idea of what life should look like, right? So if I was back with Henry VIII in the 1530s, I would have loved to have been there for him to say, yeah, I'm done with the Catholic Church, right? There was this idea back then of people, they have their hierarchies, they had all this way that life's supposed to look. Oh, we have to go to war. Well, do you have a ship built? Right? They never dreamed of what it is now. What do you mean people are all kind of more, 99% of all the population is actually more in alignment. Back then it wasn't like that. Even if you were the blacksmith, you were kind of better off. There was a lot of people who died young, a lot of people who had bad sicknesses, illnesses, people who were orphaned because that was just the way. Like, the mother died at childbirth, but the baby survived. The dad probably didn't even understand what he was doing, right? And so you see that in a lot of old history. Unless you were rich and you got to go to the monasteries, that's where our DMV was back then, right? Your birth certificate, there was no birth certificate. It was, oh, you were registered, you were baptized in the church, your parents were born through that understanding. And so the only way that like society kind of moved forward were through these monasteries, but you had to have money. So there's a lot of people unaccounted for in history. The only people that are really accounted for are the people who went to monasteries, who had the family name and wanted to continue it, and that followed kind of the church protocol. And it's funny because in society today, going to get a birth certificate really is for the state, or going to get married is for the state. It's not for the church anymore, but it's for the state. So it's kind of weird, like the state and the church did intermingle. I think that's in our Constitution, the biggest. Like, our founding fathers would have never wanted that. The idea of these things come from church, and they're like embedded in state. Like, the idea of a birth certificate. So we're coming into a world to where like everything in what you're living in right now, it seems chaotic, but to me this is like, well, we were talking about psychedelics yesterday, I was at least, and actually it was weird because after we left the panel, I realized that like they're gonna start allowing psychedelics in America for medicine and mentally ill yesterday, right? And so it's a psychedelic experience that's happening when you have the outer planets. Outer planets, you can't see them with your eyes, but they are there. And if you do get a telescope, you can see them, right? So, you know, I know there's a lot of conspiracy theorists in the world, and I'm probably the biggest of them, but one thing that is not a conspiracy are those outer planets do exist. I've seen them in a telescope myself. And that's what makes it hard, is there are things that are out there that you can't see, and they have an effect on us. And that's what I like about the outer planets, because in your own life, when you're going through an outer planet transit, you're like, not that bad. And one thing about outer planets are they have to go through the whole process. So one thing I noticed about planets from Saturn inward, you could feel it pretty quick and get the tone of it, and that tone is very consistent. The outer planets don't have a consistency with what's going to happen because it's hidden. It's occult, right? Like if you're dealing with a Uranus aspect, it's setting you up for the breakdown to find the breakthrough. But during it, you know, a flat tire is the best example of Uranus, right? It's just like, I got my oil changed, I got the car seat on right, like you had everything right in your car, but you weren't thinking about the tires, right? It's always what you weren't thinking about with Uranus. And it's like, even though every week your friend or somebody goes, you need to change those tires, he's got the steel belt showing. Nah, I'm good, they always work. It's that thing that always works that breaks. So if we think about society, it's next week we have Uranus coming into Gemini. And actually, we're not going to do too many slides because those are boring to me. I like astrology better. But what's going to be interesting is that with Uranus now, it's like what our minds can't see yet or even understand is what's coming. So if we go back to the last time Uranus was in Gemini, so here's today, and I will do it to where it's easier to see and bigger. And I will use some annotations as well. Oh, there we go. Annotate 29. So here we are with Uranus today at 29 degrees of Taurus. And so when this thing comes into Gemini, we have to think the last time we were here. I'm a recurrence astrologer, so I'm always looking at the patterns of what happened the last time. What happened the last time? What happened the time before that? When were these all together doing the same thing? How long ago was that? How many times has that happened in history? What happened in history? And history repeats itself, but it comes in a different form because life changes. So we have a cell phone today, and back then it was a Squire, right? So, and not everybody had a Squire, and not everybody even had ink or a quill pen, or even understood how to write, right? Not a lot of people did. So everything's going to have its own nuance to it. But this is what's going to be interesting, is that, to me, the first one is Uranus to pay attention to. Now, a lot of the Uranus literature, of course, astrologically, didn't really start coming out until the 19th century. Of course, it was discovered in the 18th century. But it's one of those things to where it really was like, how are we going to attach these outer planets to signs? Because every planet rules a sign. So Aquarius, oh, well, that was the easiest one to start with because Saturn ruled both Aquarius and, of course, Capricorn first. But there's a connection with Saturn, right? His father, Uranus. And so Uranus never did have a home, and he is on the highest of the hierarchy of the gods. And if you think about it, that's that idea of the father figure that isn't seen, the avoidant energy that's not seen, but can come in to view, right? But it's almost like you have to kind of find him. And so with Uranus, it's always this energy that represents our collective, because the collective is something that we think of in our minds that we see, but we don't see. If we think about everybody in the world, we'll never see everybody in the world. We'll never, in our eyes, see them in person. You can't get video camera to see 8 billion people. So it's a concept in our mind that there is a collective, but is there? It kind of is the whole, if the bear's in the woods shitting in the forest, did he really shit? I say that instead of the tree. But I think with Uranus here into Gemini, the last time, the world was on an edge about resources. The number one value of a collective is where they live, believe it or not, right? Like, I live in this country because Taurus deals with land. It deals with what we own and ownership. It deals with the monies, and countries get attached to that. Uranus breaks all that stuff apart. It also reminds us that we all don't have the same values. That's why it's been very divisive over the last 7 years. But I think what's going to be the most interesting, and we could do this now, thank God they did this last year. So Uranus next week on the 25th for us here in California moves into Gemini at 0 degree. Now the last time was last year. What I noticed with outer planets is, think about Pluto. Pluto came into Aquarius in 2023 for a little bit. It went March to May, went retrograde, and then got out, went back into Capricorn. That was it. And then 2024 came back into Capricorn, and we had to wait until, oh my gosh, the end of 2024, November, finally Pluto came into Aquarius. That's when it gets felt. Whenever we're feeling a planet finally come back in, is when we fully get, okay, this is the picture. Now Pluto, we'll get to it. We're going to get to it last. Uranus, though, we saw it last year. Look at what happened with AI. Look at what happened with communication. People have, what I notice on Instagram now, or I don't really do TikTok, but it's like all these things about people and values are shifting now into trying to understand other people better, right? Usually negatively, unfortunately, right? Like, this partner did this, and this is this kind of person, and they say this, and they say this. Because now it's going to be all about what kind of people are we? And I love Gemini because it's gossip. And that comes from the English when the king used to send somebody down and say, go sip at the tavern to hear what everybody's saying. Go sip. Right? So Gemini deals with what we're hearing as well, the ears. And so it's interesting because it really comes into a sign it likes. It's been starved in Taurus. There's not a lot to, let's be real, the physical reality, money, a car, your house is boring. It's the most boring stuff. Now, beauty's different, art. So like Taurus holds all these keys to beautiful things in life that we treasure and that we want to also feel that we're confident because of that with. And Gemini, though, is what's really interesting to us. When you get to the beginning of Gemini, the Pleiades are there, the seven sisters, the literal seven sisters themselves. It's just that 29 Taurus, 0 Gemini. And so this is what's interesting is everything's coming into play this year, and it's Uranus being the last outer planet to move signs, because it was just this year in February that Neptune ingressed into Aries and stayed there. Last year it came back into Pisces, and that was a long fall and winter we just went through. Oh my gosh, that was Neptune at the end of Pisces. And a lot had to be surrendered and let go of. A lot. Now we come into where it gets interesting. The last time it was here, and this will be fun, because we're going to kind of do it as a backtrack for a second. 1942 was the last time it came in, but prior to that, it was October 4th, 1941, and August of 1941. Now, I know that scares people because that's World War II. But what else was it? Well, I mean, I had talked about Albert Hoffman and his bike ride. That's when he was doing his work. So psychedelics became a thing. But the other big thing at that time are, if you think about what was happening in Europe, there were all these agreements after World War I, and everybody was abiding by them. But Hitler had a different idea. Hitler was like, no, I'm going to make a Luftwaffe, but nobody did anything about it. They just kind of said, you're not supposed to do that. But he did anyway, and nobody stopped it. What happened with all these treaties and everything broke, right? So the League of Nations, which now we call NATO, is what broke, right? Like the League of Nations said that Germany had to have a small military and it wasn't allowed to go bigger because they caused World War I. Well, Hitler, the very Uranus Gemini, invades France after Poland, comes in, gets all the French leaders, puts them in the same train that they signed the treaty in, and humiliates them and says, we're breaking this treaty up and I own France now, and that's never going to happen again, right? And it's kind of like this moment of like, what the heck? And Europe gets really scared, which really ironic is we're going to go back to the next one that goes back, and that's 1859, 2 years before the Civil War. But what was happening then? There was a president named Buchanan who came in 1856 during the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, which we just had in 2022. So if you see back in 1859, Neptune in Pisces, 24 degree. So we just had that in 2022. And Jupiter in Gemini, we're in Jupiter Cancer now. So believe it or not, just what's kind of crazy is actually, believe it or not, just 2 years after this, now we're going to just go, let's just move this to 1861. And now you see Neptune in Aries, or Neptune about to come back into Aries, 1861. It did what we just went through. Here, we'll just do this a month. Uranus, Gemini, Neptune, Aries right there, 1 degree. Uranus at 11 degrees. So the closest first hit we have of the outer planets doing what they're doing now is World War, or the Civil War. And that was the big debate about, I know a lot of people think it was about slavery, which that was a huge part of it, but it was prior to slavery. It was about voter fraud. That's what started the whole Civil War, is voter fraud.